All right, time for another draftphysics.com, debatephysics.com also. Video presentation. All right, so Professor Dave will do a few of his videos. This is his introduction to classical physics. And it's, just the generic crap that is qualifiable as pseudoscience because, frankly, science really should be about evidence and confirmation and trying to establish a truth through something other than just doctrine and dogma statements, proclamations. And it should be understandable. That is, it should be able to show somebody, okay, and explain it without 4 years of education to do it. It really should be demonstrably true. And the argument is none of this physics is demonstrably true, and it's all just conjecture. And somehow it's conjecture that they have some sort of reason to be biased for, because they will argue that any argument requiring modification or change seems to provoke nothing but hostile reaction. So anyway, let me read a little bit of his junk that he writes underneath this, describing the video. So he says, physics is the granddaddy of science. So obviously it really wasn't, in the sense that it wasn't termed physics, okay, and clearly it wasn't science. When did science start and when did it end? And you'd almost argue that it started with Galileo and it ended with Newton. And they just went back to being religious again. So there was a little moment there where they sought the truth, and it was just a moment. When the ancient dudes in togas were philosophizing about the way the universe works, they were setting the stage for what we now know as physics. So you'd say it's a pretty bad stage because, yes, it was full of hobgoblins and woo ghosts and all kinds of bullshit. Even though it didn't really get going until Galileo and Newton, right? It got going and then stopped dead with Leibniz and Huygens. So they just ruined it all. And it's Huygens, really. We're still stuck in the Huygens-Newton debate, and particle wave, and that translates into momentum versus kinetic energy. It's just a forever debate. Why should we study physics? What you should be studying or thinking about is modeling the universe, and that's the idea, is to understand how it works. Duh. Okay. What is the goal of physics? Yes, to understand, okay, how the mechanical system actually functions. And all they've done to it is create the pervertiverse, some kind of weird universe where the small things have many more functions and features than the big things. We don't have any ESP. We can't tell where our entangled partner is and what he's doing. We don't get to pull things with our magic pull powers. All of that crap. Okay, what do we mean when we refer to classical physics? Well, that's where the big lie is, because they claim Leibniz and Huygens to be classical physics and imply that it's Newton, when, Newton opposed it, and that's the fact. It's not Newton's physics. Let's reflect together for a moment before we dive into this hefty subject. So I would argue it's a really simple subject. I mean, 10-ton train going 5 miles an hour, 5-ton train going 10 miles an hour. What happens when they crash into each other? What happens when they pull on a rope? Tug of war. Can't get much dirt, simple, trivial almost. And they haven't done the experiment. There's no paper written about the outcome of the simple experiment. 10 mass doesn't have to be a train. And the fact is that there'll be no sign of anything called kinetic energy. There's just going to be momentum. They have the example of the ballistic pendulum. You make a heavy thing to collect the energy of a bullet's direction. you really do a pretty good job of actually collecting it. You collect 95% of the momentum, but you lose 99.94% of the kinetic energy because it doesn't exist. There is no such thing. That's why the ballistic pendulum can't collect it, because it doesn't exist. The 8-pound bowling ball going 16 miles an hour, there's no theory that explains how it can give away more momentum than the 16-pound ball going 8. It can only give away the momentum. There is no capacity for the kinetic energy to do anything called work. Okay, it's a fable. It's nonsense. And it's right in the core of their physics, this idiotic pseudoscience, this flat earth nonsense, right in the core. Everything done by accelerators, everything, all the particle physics nonsense, the Higgs boson, all of that crap is all calculated to exist because they're using 1/2 mv squared instead of mv. Fact. They measured the weight of the electron wrong because they're using the wrong formula. And they won't counter my argument that every single piece of credible evidence points to they made a huge mistake in adopting 1/2 mv squared. There was no evidence for it. It was just talk. It was called the living force. That should have been a huge giveaway that this is religion, that it's not science. And they still defend it. They have nothing. Every time it's, accidentally they do the experiment now and then. The Mythbusters crash cars 50 miles an hour, 100 miles an hour. Their theory says the 100-mile-an-hour car has 4 times the energy. Yet it only showed twice the crushing. Come on. How glaring does the truth have to be? And these glib, obnoxious, jackass scientists who claim to be smart run away from the argument. They won't counter this argument. I can't pay them to do it. I can't humiliate them into doing it. Yeah, I should create an icon for the video. Yeah, fucker. Anyway. So that's where we are. And such. So let's play this introduction. I'll play the rest of his video. I'll just keep on playing his shitty science. His shitty, unevidenced, nonsense religion. He's just a preacher for a silly religion. And that's all he is. He doesn't give a shit about the truth, and he doesn't give a shit about the concept of science. Because the concept of science says that when your theory of energy completely disagrees with thousand-of-year-old experiments like the balance. The balance is telling you what equals what. And it's giving you a statement that, okay, 4 pounds going 1 velocity is not the same as 1 pound going 2 velocity. It's clearly not the same thing. Jerks. Okay. Settings. Yes, I didn't do my settings. Sorry. Should do that ahead of time. Blah, 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 blah. All right. Play the video.
Hey, it's Professor Dave. I want to tell you about classical physics.
He knows a lot about the science stuff. Professor Dave explains.
So he claims to know something, but does he really know that Leibniz just stated the truth? He didn't prove it with an experiment. Did he really research and analyze the Deschardelet clay experiments, the infamously famous clay experiments that, well, a physicist should be able to figure out that denting clay with a round object probably isn't going to give you a linear test of energy. It's not going to give you a good answer. Physicists should be able to figure that out. A non-linear surface isn't going to give you a correct answer.
Let's go back in time to the dawn of man.
I don't think it should go back that far, but frankly, the whole thing is yes, we're just blobs of chemistry. We finally evolved to a point where we could do this conceptual thing, and we developed language. Now, we had the capacity to be as smart as we are now. 200,000 years ago, you could probably that guy could go to high school and learn. He might not be quite as smart as us, but blah, 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 pretty close. The brain was already there. And the only thing that was missing was all this infrastructure that makes it possible for us to be articulate. The language part was missing.
Sapiens will live in small tribes for hundreds of thousands of years, struggling to survive. But
killing each other is a better description, but go ahead.
as these tribes grow and merge, their cultures merge.
And kill each other.
And eventually, written language evolves. This is the beginning of recorded history and the dawn of modern civilization.
So yes, the whole idea that you can compile the experimental evidence, you can compile evidence, compile arguments, and not screw it up because you don't have to remember the story. You can read the story. Yeah. So obviously it gets pretty messy when it's word of mouth kind of nonsense.
In these early centers of culture, like ancient Greece, great thinkers would gather to discuss ideas and ask questions.
So they get to say who was the great thinker, right? Is by this democracies kind of idea, And frankly, probably the best of them weren't liked very much. The smartest persons probably weren't the people. They probably stoned them, and so we don't hear about them.
What are we? What is the universe made of?
Yeah, well, those are easy questions. The universe is made out of force, moving the speed of light, and matter that gets pushed around by it. And we are just chemical robots.
How does it behave? The analysis that was prompted by these questions was labeled natural philosophy.
Right, which is a shitty pile of nonsense, frankly. It should just be the truth. That should be the pursuit, the facts. Just call it the facts. All right.
A singular field of study that encompassed science, philosophy, and religion, as these were more or less one topic back then.
Right, which is kind of ludicrous, right? I mean, one of them is a silly story, unevidenced by anything but anecdotal crap, and the other one is something you can show somebody,
Philosophers made conjectures about what they could observe, the form and properties of matter, and the changes matter can undergo.
So all of this is sort of a waste of time, frankly, because we know the science didn't really start yet.
But over the centuries, our understanding of the universe progressed until we arrived at figures like Galileo and Newton.
Right, and that was the end. So, Descartes should be in there. And a couple other people probably who spouted a few good arguments. Fadio even, the inventor of Lesage gravity. It's Fadio gravity, actually. A mechanical mechanism that causes gravity, that idea.
Who brought about the birth of classical physics.
Right, the birth of physics, period, should be the point. A strict analyzing of motion in the universe, and frankly, everything that's worth talking about has something to do with something moving and something banging into something else. And that's about all there is. So the argument really is the transfer of motion in the universe from objects to objects. And that's all that's really happening. I mean, the sun isn't really, you could argue the sun's really not creating anything. The sun's just vibrating, and that vibration causes the stuff going into the sun to bounce off of it with more energy, you could argue. But anyway, let's continue.
What was incredible about this time was the realization that everything in the universe operates according to certain principles. Principles that...
Yes, the real stark part. I mean, the part for Descartes and some of these others was the realization that the universe is a clock, a mechanical system. That it's like us building a mechanical system to tell time or to do this or do... And the universe was doing the same thing. The universe was just made out of mechanical things. Things that had properties and very few properties. These little simple things with simple properties could create something more complicated. That's what the realization was, is that you could throw rocks. You could take a pile of rocks and you could throw them on the ground. Or you could look at the clouds and you could see elephants. That simple things could create something complex.
that can be known, understood, and described using mathematics.
So this idea that it's all about the math is just a formalization of what's observed. It's a simplification. You're just saying, what's the important feature? Let's take the important features and understand them as quantities. And they, they have a circumstantial implication that is simple enough that you can describe it as you either add it or you subtract it, or you divide it, or you multiply it.
The implications of this are astonishing. It means that if we drop an
So again, it's the implication of the math is not astonishing. The fact that the universe is derivable into very simple equations like mv, like the idea that it's just about how much mass and how much velocity, and that'll tell you how much energy is going to get transferred in any circumstance, because that stuff has to be conserved. So that's Descartes' contribution, essentially, is just the idea that the universe appears to have all the energy it needs in it already. It doesn't need anything to manipulate anything, and all it needs is time for stuff to move from one thing to another.
Object off the top of a tall building. There is a mathematical equation that predicts how fast.
And the math can be written in lots of different ways. The simple rule is for dropping things is that it's about time, because it's a time-dependent force. So let Professor Dave explain how it's a distance-dependent force when, no, it's a time-dependent force. You get 9.8 meters of increase in your velocity per second. And so in 2 seconds, you'll drop 4 times the distance you would drop in 1 second, but you won't have 4 times the energy. You only have twice the velocity because it was only twice the time, and you're only going to weigh twice as much. Those are the facts that they haven't tested. So they accepted this Leibnizian horse shit, okay, and Leibniz just stated it. 4 pounds dropped 1 foot is the same as 1 pound dropped 4 feet. It's not true. The lever proves it's not true. The law of the lever proves it's not true. And yet they just proclaim it, and they've never done the experiment, ever. There's no record of the experiment having been conducted to demonstrate that those two things are the same quantity, the same force. And they're clearly not.
The ball will drop, precisely where it will be at any given instant, and so forth.
So they can't do any of this precise stuff because they don't have the right theory or the right argument. And understanding that, yes, in this case, you can square the time to derive, okay, the distance, because the distance will be quadratically connected to the time. So all you need is the at squared part to derive the distance. You don't need this v initial times whatever time that would be, which would have to be 0, and then the 1/2 just screws it up. The simple point is that all you need to know is the rate, 9.8, and time squared, and you'll know the distance, because it's 1/2 the 9.8. Can you get it? Like, it's 9.8 meters of velocity, 9.8 meters per second of velocity, but you only actually move 4.9 meters. That's why the half is there. So you get 4 units of 4.9. The first unit of time, you only go 4.9 meters. The second unit of time, you go 15, almost 15 meters. So you go 4 the first, and then you get 3 4 units, because you get one 9.8 for free, and then you add another 4.9. So the t squared is all you really need to kind of understand. 1/2 a t squared, that's all you need to know. And frankly, what you should really understand is this, yes, twice the velocity is, twice the energy. Not 4 times the energy, only twice the energy. 5 times the fuel, 5 times the energy, not 25 times the energy. 5 times the velocity. So, just do that, Professor Dave. You're saying you don't have pseudoscience. I'm saying you have no evidence that twice the velocity is 4 times the energy, 3 times the velocity is 9 times the energy, 4 times the velocity is 16 times the energy, 5 times the velocity is 25 times the energy. You have 0 evidence, no experimental evidence to demonstrate any of that crap to be true. How is it not pseudoscience for you to claim it is and insist that it is and insist that I believe it or I'm a pseudoscientist and I hate science because I don't believe your fable? You have zero evidence. I mean, there's really zero evidence. And yet you claim a reasonable person must believe in your God. The 1/2 mv squared.
This means that the motion of any object in the universe is not random, but is instead quantifiable.
Oh, well, so clearly the argument that anything was random was the part about getting scientific and saying, no, you can follow it. And there's cause and effect. So the idea of cause and effect is, sort of universally accepted as a scientific principle at this time. And at the same time, they're also writing about how God is kind of dead because, frankly, he doesn't play a role. There's no evidence of the miracles and any role for a God to play because God's not going to decide who lives and who dies. Bacteria is going to. Some other kind of crap is going to decide. Good people, and bad people aren't getting what they deserve. That was sort of becoming quite obvious.
Calculable and predictable, whether we are talking about a pebble or a...
So more of this calculation stuff, they've never quite been able to make a concise, finished description of airplane buoyancy, right? Because it is a little tricky. I mean, is it the velocity and you're pointing in a direction and you go in that direction, or is it all about this atmosphere and buoyancy? And those are unfinished questions. The galaxy, is it really about a mass in the center and everything's just going around the mass in the center? Or is it kind of obviously that these are kind of created, as biosystems with more than one focus, and that the one arm is basically balanced with another arm on the other side, that it's really two things orbiting each other, not things orbiting a heavy mass in the center. They haven't even figured that part out. And of course, cars hitting rocks, they really don't get it all. They think you can have 200 momentum go into a crash and somehow only pop out 100 momentum in one direction because somehow energy cancels when, again, there's no possibility of cancellation in the idea of conservation.
Galaxy. In this way,
energy has to keep continuing. It can't just cancel. It always has to be accounted for as going somewhere. It can't stay anywhere. It has to be in a moving object, or something going in a circle, something going back and forth, or something flying off, but it can't cancel.
Classical physics was able to take the chaotic and mysterious world of our ancestors and transform it into a landscape of mathematical order.
So this is more bullshit to be showing this image in this context, because clearly Newton would have found somebody suggesting an invisible man answer as being crappy science. That you ought to have a real explanation. So just saying hobgoblins create a bent geodesic, he wouldn't have gotten away with that, and he knew it. This is the inverse square law in 2 dimensions. That's all this is. It's nothing. This isn't an advancement in your understanding in any way whatsoever. If you were to draw the inverse square law in 2 dimensions, this is what you would draw. Newton could have drawn this picture and said, see, it goes to infinity, and it goes into infinity this way. He could have drawn that picture. Would it make any difference? Would it give you an explanation of what causes gravity? No. It's just an explanation of how light flies out. You could draw the same picture to describe how light gets out of the sun, because it's doing exactly the same thing. It's obeying a bent geodesic.
Whether this idea seems off-putting or exciting, we have to accept that the universe is math.
Oh, so this is just so stupid. So math is just shorthand. It's just an abbreviation. It's just taking something, You see a system moving and you can recognize it has certain limitations. You can define that by the math. There's a certain amount of water. It's going to create an eddy. There's a certain maximum velocity the water can achieve. I mean, there's all kinds of things you could figure out, but it's not, the eddy isn't math. The math is just describing, in simplistic terms, in the most simple language possible, the variables that will decide function, and that's it. But the universe is not math. It's not made out of math. It's made out of objects that obey, simple dynamic rules that make it possible for you to describe them mathematically. All right, so obviously whatever S, K log W, who cares? Don't know what that is. E equals mc squared, just made up crap, There's no such thing as a velocity squared or cubed. It has no geometric rationality. It's just a fact that anything in the universe, anything taking up space in the universe is in the field of energy. And now the energy has to have more energy in the sense that it's going to be doing more reflecting if you occupy the space it could travel through. So obviously any piece of matter is getting bombarded by about a ton of energy in the native universe. And that's all this is really saying. The bigger you are, the more of these little shitty things are going to hit you. Those little things right there. You can just imagine, right? If I'm really tiny, only 2 hit me per second. If I'm bigger and bigger and bigger, it gets 40, 90, 100. The bigger I get, the more of those things are going to be hitting me per second. That's the energy the object has. It doesn't have any innate energy. An electron has no innate energy. It's just being forced, pushed into conditions. All right, this Fg equals m1, m2, r squared. Now, I didn't, see, they can redraw something and confuse you. But this is just really saying they don't need to do this formula this way. It would have been much clearer if they said F equals gm1 and then plus gm2 r squared. Because then you'd understand that there's 2 different gravitational bodies creating a force, and all you're going to do is add those 2 forces. So the moon would have an gm, the mass times the gravitational constant. That's its force. That's the gravity it's creating. That's the imbalance in the energy field that it's creating. And then the Earth would be m1, times the gravitational constant, and that's the pressure and a change in the balance that it's creating. And they're 2 separate equations. They're 2 separate entities creating a force, and you're just saying, let's add them together. So if they just wrote it different, it would be, in my opinion, so much more a better elucidate that they don't need to have the second body. The Earth's gravity should be understood that it's completely independent of the moon's existence. The moon has nothing to do with the Earth's gravity. The Earth's gravity exists independently of the existence of the moon, and the moon's gravity exists independently of the existence of the Earth. And by tying the 2 things together, it just makes it messy. They should have just said Fg equals gm r squared over r squared. They should never, you don't need to combine them.
Because when we use these equations to make highly precise predictions...
So again, highly precise predictions they don't make. So again, they just sit there and do circular math. But they don't predict accurately. So if we did a highly precise calculation of the exhaust of a rocket in terms of kinetic energy, we'd get a number, this huge giant number, 2,678 joules of energy. And would we see the rocket move with that? No. So clear demonstration, you don't predict correctly, you don't assert correctly. All right, and the fact is what's going to really work is momentum. Calculate the momentum of the exhaust, the thrust, and then you'll know the momentum of the spaceship, because those 2 things will be the same. Because the 3rd law does work, and it only works for momentum.
about how an object will behave, the correlation with real events is undeniable.
So the big lie. So the correlation that the 8-pound ball going 16 miles an hour has twice as much energy as a 16-pound ball going 8 miles an hour. No evidence that it exists, right? No bowler uses the lighter ball because it doesn't produce any more energy. It doesn't knock down any more pins. It's just a big fat fucking fable. Okay, the fact is they can crash the cars. The Mythbusters did it. No evidence of kinetic energy. They smashed some clay. No evidence of kinetic energy. Okay, ballistic pendulum. No evidence of kinetic energy. 10-ton train, 5-ton, 5-mass object made into a 10-mass object, traveling now with the same momentum but losing half the kinetic energy through mysterious events. So somehow it got deformed, somehow there was heat, somehow there was noise, there was sound that made we lost all the momentum, half the momentum. Any evidence that this is true? Zero evidence. Okay, it's just a fable, a pile of stinking rotten nonsense, and they just keep preaching it. Okay, they never even think about it for a moment and just say, yeah, you know, those are pretty good arguments. It fails the lever test, fails the ballistic pendulum, fails a car crash, fails a tug of war. I mean, how it fails the water hose test. I can make free energy by just turning the nozzle on my fucking hose. Bullshit, I can. It's garbage, junk, pseudoscience. It's worse than flat earth. It is so unevidenced nonsense. And they preach it with such arrogance.
It is precisely this kind of math that allows us to fly airplanes.
So he's got the picture of the damn fucking rocket right there. It's a lie, okay? Kinetic energy doesn't make this work. This doesn't obey Newton's third law in terms of kinetic energy. You have thousands of times more kinetic energy going out one end than you have kinetic energy moving in the rocket. Absolute frickin' goddamn fact. It's just as wrong as the gun and the bullet, okay? Where's Newton's third law? The gun goes off with 2 joules, the bullet goes off with 2,000 joules. No sign of obeying energy conservation or Newton's third law. You know, and so this, you know, to show this image when you're lying about the truth is it's all about just momentum. Momentum lands you on the moon. Kinetic energy theory does not, because it's not real science. It's not a real fact. There is no fucking such thing in the real universe as 1/2 mv squared. It's nonsense. It has nothing to do with reality.
Build roller coasters.
It's a fable.
And even send astronauts to the moon.
So amazing. He says it when, no, it's Newton's physics that landed us on the moon. It's not Leibniz and it's not Huygens.
At the beginning of the 20th century, advancements
And it's not Einstein.
made by Albert Einstein and other brilliant people showed us that classical physics breaks down in
All right, so there's no evidence that it actually breaks down. So again, they didn't show us anything. They declared it again. So let's go to the Eddington experiment, another pseudoscience pile of crap, right? I mean, what credible scientist? Show me somebody who's supposed to be a credible scientist who would say, oh, you shouldn't have to repeat the experiment. And, oh, yeah, we can do other experiments. We don't have to do that one, even though it's very revealing and you can see it and it's obvious. Let's not bother. So, you know, 400 times better resolution from space. We're supposed to believe they've never even attempted the experiment. The experiment that made Einstein famous, and they've never even attempted it from space. It takes 5 minutes. It will cost $64. You know, it's not. You don't have to build a billions and billions of dollar collider. You don't have to build LIGO giant, you know, evacuated tunnels. You don't have to do any of that crap. It's such a cheap experiment. I mean, literally, you're talking about at most $10,000 of hardware time. And they haven't done it. It just shows it's bullshit. It's garbage science.
its ability to describe things if those things are very small, smaller than an atom.
So yeah, where we can't see, they're going to tell us what the truth is, and that it's all full of hobgoblins and pixies and magic dust and all kinds of fairy bullshit. Okay, and they'll claim it, but they'll never show it. They'll never show us the Higgs boson. They're never going to show us even a quark. They can't even show us frickin' positrons. They'll show us a 1964 picture of a positron, okay, and that's all they got. And it's just them saying so. It's not a proton. That's what we're asserting. Did we prove it's not a proton? No, of course we didn't prove it's not a proton, but that's no fun.
Or if those things are moving very fast, near the speed of light. But we now know a lot about these realms too.
So again, they claim to know something, and all they do is break it and make a mess out of it, okay? So we know this image of a nucleus with the orbiting crap is horse shit. They still think it orbits in some way, but they think it orbits because it doesn't know where it is, okay? It's confused about where it is. There's no such thing as being anywhere, which is just such, again, just it's such anti Galileo, Descartes, and Newton. They were talking about a real universe with real shit in it. Not this idea that things are just imaginary things, virtual things. Oh, it's so bad.
Which comprise the field of modern physics. And we will be ready to learn about that once we have completed our study of classical physics.
So the classical physics isn't classical physics. It's not Galileo, Descartes, and Newton's physics. It's Leibniz and Huygens physics. And clearly, yes, none of that physics has in it the electron, the proton, the neutron, these key elements. It doesn't, put together these simple things. I mean, we haven't even gotten to subjects like the strong force, which is absolute crap. You want to get a proton close to a proton, just stick an electron between them. Maxwell could have told you that.
Since classical came first. And we still use these concepts to describe...
So again, there's more baby talk about, somehow we still endorse this, except we say something completely different is the right answer. So it's just nonsense. The fact is, momentum works. So you have to concede its existence because it actually does work. And all you do is, pretend where you don't actually measure the result of your experiment. That's when you can make all these claims about how many joules it is and how much energy it is. But you don't prove it. You never show it doing any work. You never show the 8-pound bowling ball going twice the speed, knocking down more pins.
Ocean of almost everything in the universe. Einstein himself once said that...
So again, this is kind of bullshit to call, let's talk about classical physics, and yet we'll talk about this asshole. All right, so Einstein, the most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it's comprehensible. So that's just a stupid statement, too. Why shouldn't it be understandable? We watch rocks fall down a mountain. The hard part to figure out is how the mountain got there. But once you find the seashells up on the top of the mountain, well, you can sort of figure out how the mountain got there. One thing, it was probably pushed up there, but anyway, but there's no, why should it be surprising that the universe is comprehensible when everything about it just is so reliable? You throw a rock in the water that doesn't bounce off the water. It doesn't, it's all very reliable. You can depend on it.
The most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it is comprehensible. This means...
And obviously there was no comprehension. There's no way you can understand a bent geodesic in 3 dimensions. You can't draw it in your head. You can't figure out it to be in anything other than a vacuum cleaner. You have a thing, and somehow the opposite of photons is happening. That is, it's pulling energy out of the universe, okay, and sucking it into a singularity, an infinite point. And it just disappears from existence in the universe magically. What a pile of crap. When the obvious truth is that, oh yeah, everything is hot because the external universe is crushing everything, okay, pushing it into little round balls, all right? And those little round balls are really hot in the center because in the center there's still the tug of war. This way is still fighting with this way. They didn't cancel. This way didn't cancel with this way. No, they're fighting constantly. And that's why every single massive object in space is hot. I mean, you could argue it looks cold, but it's hundreds of degrees Kelvin. It's lots and lots of energy. Okay, it's cold for us. We are really hot objects, frankly. We like things really warm. Freezing, the freezing point of water is not a cold place. It's a frickin' warm place.
That through the language of physics, we have already begun the incredible task of knowing how the universe works.
So again, and how they know it to work. Wormholes, bullshit, dark matter, dark energy, fake Huygens-y bullshit. I mean, it's all a bunch of wooey nonsense. The damn particles aren't in a place. The three-dimensional space isn't three-dimensional space. You can frame it into warped blobs. You can, break time. I mean, all this bullshit. It's a horrible, silly, ugly, jerky fable. Unevidenced crap.
On the most intimate level. And
whatever that means, the most intimate level. What does that mean? We sent our satellite to the planet, and it crashed into it, and it had an intimate reaction. Yeah, whatever that is. So he's showing the little rocket again. So he's going to blame all of technology on their wacky modern physics. Not trial and error, which it's really made out of. You find out a little indication of something does something. You mix a couple of chemicals together. Hey, it turns blue. Maybe we can use blue for something. We can dye something with that. We don't need any quantum theory for all of that crap. None of this crap was built by any of their abstract notions of bent space and dark matter and Higgs bosons, singularities. None of it. None of it was dependent on believing any of their fables.
The technology we have been able to create is a working demonstration of our sophisticated...
It's a lie. That's just a lie. I should put liar down, but that's just a lie to say that demonstrates that what they believe, that their God theory works. No, their God theory didn't invent any of this stuff. I existed, okay, when all of this integrated circuit thing happened, okay, and it didn't happen because of a bunch of wooey philosophy.
Understanding of physics, from computers and satellites to lasers and rockets. Whether we can one day know everything there is to know.
So again, this is kind of silly, right? I mean, all you're trying to do is establish the working principles of the function of the objects, and the fact is, yes, I have a simulation of charge made out of almost no rules. I mean, it's so 2 + 2 + 3 physics. I mean, it's so simple. 2 kinds of force, 2 kinds of matter, 3 kinds of interaction. The end. Perfectly demonstrates how charge works. All right, all of it's going to come down to stuff that frickin' simple. They're the ones that have made a preposterous mess out of this. So everything, yes, obviously you can't know this gigantic checkerboard, how many times it's made a picture of Madonna, okay, giving you the finger. Yes, maybe that image has been created by the universe. All right, so you can't know all of those. They've been washed away on the beach of time, so to speak. But you can understand the beach of time. You can understand how the mechanical thing works. You can understand the tides and the reliability and the mechanisms. And that's what they're making a mess out of. The dirt, crude simplicity of the mechanics of the universe. The energy, the thermodynamics is so simple. Gravity is putting energy into storage, and then the storage leaks out of the batteries. That's all that's happening.
Can't yet say, but we already know more than enough to keep you busy catching up for a while.
Whatever. So they don't know nothing. They, they broke everything because they stopped doing science after Newton. They just started making religions up again. Let's believe wooey crap because it's fun.
So let's learn some physics.
Ugh, which won't happen unless you concede physics is a religion. So he's just going to teach you about their special catechism, their little sayings, and per second, their little piles of mush. The holy 1/2 mv squared. Crap, nonsense, rubbish. Okay, enough of that. All right, so that seems like enough of a video. I didn't have to draw anything, so I'll do that in the next video. Coming soon.